meeting here. There we go. Well, welcome to our first meeting for ICR Talent Coalition for 2023. Excited to have you guys all here and excited for our guest presenters for today as well. My name is Laura Seifer. I am the workforce specialist here at the Economic Alliance. Joined the EA in April of last year and rolled into this position in August of last year. So fairly new, but excited to get to know all you guys and have these opportunities to share information with everyone. Sorry, I'm letting people in here. I also have my co-pilot here with me, Tom Banta. I'll let Tom Banta introduce himself.
Thanks, Laura. Good morning, everybody, and echo your sentiments. It's a great group. Great to see everybody today.
All right. Well, if Tom, I don't know if Tom, if you want to kick things off, starting with Dustin, introducing him.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. As Laura said, we've got a good lineup today, and we're going to kick it off with Dustin Miller. I'll do a quick intro of Dustin, but for those of you that were part of this conversation last year about this time, Dustin introduced the Iowa Talent Poll, and he's going to walk us through that again today and talk about some of the nuances there. So we look forward to that conversation. And then following that, we'll go a little deeper on the Kirkwood Skills Report with Jasmine Almoyed. So little more on Dustin here. Dustin is a member of the Governmental Affairs Department at Nyemaster Good. His law practice is primarily focused on representing clients as a lobbyist at the Iowa legislature and with agencies of the state of Iowa, but also practices law in the areas of environmental and water quality, municipal law, and economic development. He also serves as the executive director for the Iowa Chamber Alliance. Prior to moving to Nyemaster, he was the general counsel for the Iowa League of Cities after serving 2 years as the director of governmental affairs. He was primarily responsible for the League's state legislative activities and providing legal guidance to member cities. This work included federal and state regulatory work on environmental compliance issues, such as the compliance with the Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act. He was raised in Lacona, Iowa, population 363, and returned to the state in 2012 after working in Washington, D.C. in the office of the Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture with tribal governments in multiple agency areas that included federal environmental compliance for over $1 billion in telecommunications and wastewater infrastructure projects authorized under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. He also worked on the Crow Creek Sioux Reservation with a nonprofit he founded to spur economic development, and worked in Houses of Parliament for Alistair Burt's MP for NE Bedfordshire. He received his undergraduate degree from University of Iowa and his law degree from Drake Law School, where he also received a certificate in food and agricultural law. So without further ado, Dustin Miller, everybody. Thanks, Dustin.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for having me. And Laura, I was not made aware that Ryan Heyer would be on, so if you could remove him, that'd be wonderful. Great to see you, Ryan. So Tom gave you more than you needed, and as all of us know, sitting through those is not always very fun, your own intro. But the main thing here that, as Tom covered, is the Iowa Chamber Alliance. I am the executive director. The Iowa Chamber Alliance is the 15 largest chambers and economic development corporations in the state, and both corridor, both the Economic Alliance and Iowa City are members of the Iowa Chamber Alliance. Our main focus is on policy. And if you couldn't tell, I'm sorry, I put my AirPods in, but I lost my voice yesterday. And as I told Laura and Tom, I said, the good news is I only have 3 presentations today without a voice as opposed to 5 yesterday. So the Iowa Chamber Alliance focuses primarily on policy, and one of the areas that has come about and that has really become a focus for us is talent attraction. So back in 2021, we started our first talent poll where we went into the field to try and ask people ask Iowans, a group of Iowans, how they feel about their state and things that are strengths and things that are weaknesses. And I'm going to provide you more details on that. Now, on this too, I just want to highlight our pollster that we're using is Signal. The reason we used with Signal, they're well respected by the majority caucuses. You'll see their names when you get to political season. You'll see their names listed out there on pollsters for nationwide Senate campaigns and that. And we thought it was really important to use somebody that the majority caucuses trusted and relied upon, so that we weren't just dismissed as another poll. And we've actually seen the effects of that in a positive way as far as how this has impacted policymakers. And let me first start off thanking Mid-American Energy. They were the underwriters for this year. And as Laura and Tom know, I'll be doing this at 10 o'clock, which will be a little slightly different with Mid-American. So I can assure you some of what I'm going to share here, you're going to hear, but it's going to be much more conversational if you plan on joining that at 10 o'clock today with Mid-American. So the reason for this is Iowa is the slowest growth state in the union since 1900. And you all know the reason that you're doing this is every single person on this call is probably dealing with a shortage in low, medium, and high skill. And it's a problem that's across the state. We actually moved talent attraction, we being the Iowa Chamber Alliance, moved talent attraction as the #1 policy priority back in 2019, not even realizing what would happen in 2020, but that continues to be the case. And really the movement of us in pushing towards that being the #1 policy priority was that this priority, talent attraction, workforce development, is really a population issue. And Iowa has a historic problem. That's why I put this on here. This is not anything new. In fact, Casey Nickel, who works with me, is just in the office over. She has a map on her wall from 1875, where Iowa used to have 9 congressional districts, and now we're down to 4. In my lifetime, we were at 6. And I think there's a really good possibility that if we don't do something very extreme in the next census, we'll be down to 3 just by representation of the populace. And this isn't a political problem. I don't necessarily care about having 4 or 3 members of Congress. This reflects the health of economic growth in the state. If we don't have bodies, which everybody in every state is competing for, it is just going to limit opportunities that we're going to have for economic growth. So as I mentioned, we created this annual talent poll, and this is year 2, but we are also plan on this to be iterative, where the same base level questions are going to be asked year after year, so that you can see trends in how people feel. And just to start off, here are some surprising things that I want you to watch for, and predictable things that I want you to watch for as we go through some of the information. The biggest surprise that I will hit upon a lot is the top reason for people to think about leaving is job opportunities. That's shocking to me. Now, obviously, a lot of this is focused upon policy things that I can take to the legislature. To me, that is not a policy priority. It's something for your communities, the corridor, to think about, that if you have people considering leaving for a job, how are we educating within our companies and within our region to let people know there are opportunities all over the place with companies on this call and within both chambers. The other surprise is safety is a top attribute, but it's not the top. For those of us like myself who are from Iowa and have lived in other places and came back, we understand that safety is a huge issue and is not and should be a top issue. But I think it's very easy when I show you the sample. If you've only ever lived here, I think it's something we could take for granted. And I think it's a real strength that we need to highlight further. What's really predictable, and this gives us the baseline to build from, is generally the 1,200 people, 1,200 Iowans that we polled this year feel really good about the state. And that's a good baseline to start from. Some of our strengths are strengths for future workforce. And I'm going to get into, when I say future workforce, really generational issues. But some of the weaknesses of Iowa are also weaknesses as well. Also predictable nationwide, inflation moved to the top policy priority, you'll see that. And then also, as I mentioned, the generational issues really truly pop up in the crosstabs. And for those of you that don't do a lot of pollster stuff, crosstabs meaning that what I'm going to give you is the very top line numbers. But for anybody interested, you can feel free to ping me, and my information is on the chamber website, where you can get very detailed and even regional information from our website. And we throw this out there just so that people understand that when we're advocating with legislators, as the Iowa Chamber Alliance, you all know that your labor shed is not just Johnson and Lynn County, that you have a very broad impact for even very rural communities and rural counties. And so when we're talking to legislators, we think that this is extremely important so that they understand that this is a statistically valid poll where we are getting rural and urban. Now, I kind of laugh about that. I know Tom has traveled a lot too. You know, when I say rural and urban, I kind of move back to Iowa because I feel like the whole state is rural. But, you know, the mayor of Des Moines gets pretty mad at me when I say that to him. But, you know, there is a real cross section depending upon the communities across the state. And that's really important when we're doing the advocacy. And as I mentioned to you, with a slow growth state, in the past 2 years, we've had at least 75% of the people polled grew up in Iowa. So that's not shocking, right? It's not shocking that, you know, the vast majority of people that we poll have grown up here and are from here, that there isn't, we know that there's not a lot of in-migration anyway, so this is not a surprising statistic. And you can see also statistically what's important, the folks that have moved here for education, those 100K earners or more, you know, typically moves here for education, and respondents with a college degree, you can see that as well. Those sorts of numbers, when we look at the crosstabs, again, fit with what we know of the demographics holistically across the state. And as I mentioned, you know, those considering leaving, I put this up there, you know, it did dip from year to year. But I will say, for those of us in the HR, in the chamber workspace, the things that's concerning is when you look at the people that are considering to leave, typically suburban urban, make over 100,000, female under 25. These are the kinds of folks that I'm sure, this is the kind of demographic that I'm sure people are trying to recruit. So we hope that this poll is helpful to people to understand that really inwardly, you know, what is your community doing, you know, as opposed to assuming that folks will come here and love it, making sure that we're being dynamic in how we're looking at this. This isn't just a policy poll to go to the legislature, but is supposed to inform each of your communities on things that could be done differently or better. This is not from my poll. I tried to be clear about that, but I think the thing that really comes up and that I'm hammering upon this year is the reality for us is, you know, we all can make fun and poke fun of ourselves, of the generations. But the reality is, you know, back in 2017, millennials became the largest generation in the labor force. And that's just the reality. And if you're not thinking about that, if you're thinking about doing things the same old, this demographic, and obviously it's not static, but ultimately this demographic does think differently and prioritizes things differently. And what's important to understand, this is a nationwide issue from a labor force standpoint. The years of where the baby boomers were the vast majority of our working population is ended. And so now you have this larger group coming in. Now I'm going to show you statistically some things that these post-millennials, both millennials and Gen Z, think and how they think differently, where Iowa is a strength. But if you're not thinking this way as well, there are weaknesses that our state has too that we also have to address. So why Iowa? This you can see year to year. The top three things I would put all in the same bucket. Cost of living has topped out, which is great because we also know in nationwide publications, Iowa always comes out strong on affordability, economic mobility, small town feel. I know I got a good belly laugh out of Tom when I said that, yes, Iowa's a state of small towns, and people recognize that. It's one of the things that's attracting. And the people, and I say this year after year, for anybody who visits, anybody who has moved here, Iowa nice is a real thing. And so, again, I think if you've only ever been here, it's tough to understand that is a trait that we need to better market, because it is a very much a real thing. And as I mentioned, safety down there is a priority, but it is not a top priority. And that's very, to me, I think undersold, because especially, being here in downtown Des Moines, the safety that's experienced here is different. Inevitably, as Tom went through my bio, I work at a large law firm in Des Moines. So every summer we get, 5 or 10 summer clerks. They stay a summer with us and sometimes go in a different place. And they say, well, I'm going to go to New York and I'm going to go to San Francisco. And inevitably, as I'm keeping tabs on them, their car gets stolen maybe once or twice, and that's just a normal thing for them. And not to say those things don't happen in Iowa, but it happens less frequently, just statistically, and it's something we have to put out there. But clearly you can see sporting events, entertainment opportunities are really at the low end, which is something that we know, and further reflects what I said about some things we have are strengths, some things are weaknesses. And on those strengths, when you look at, this is again, not our poll, the national Deloitte poll on post-millennials, cost of living is the number one thing that they care about. And when I go back and show how great is this, that when Iowans are asked, that's the thing that they enjoy. And then when we look at the generations, that's the number one thing they have. And, as I mentioned it also on the climate change side, that's something from a state standpoint. We have 2 investor-owned utilities in the state, Alliant and Mid-American, that have invested huge amounts of money in renewables. So again, that's something that could be marketed to folks that are making those decisions. And I'll get into it more, as you know, but these post-millennials are much more interested in taking these ideas into the workplace and making sure that their employers are passionate about this as well, and doing the things that they are personally passionate about. My generation, Gen X, we were, raised by baby boomers, so we were just happy to have jobs. And so it's interesting that if you're not thinking this way, if you think it's just as simple as salary and benefits, and I'm going to land people, you're probably struggling, and how you're going to think about moving forward needs to be honed in on these generational differences. So the top priorities when we ask people, from a policy perspective, what are the things that should be supported? That 0 is there is because it's something that we didn't test, and then we assumed based upon national trends and the election in 2022, inflation and cost of living. And so it's not shocking. The reason I put this out there is you're going to see in a couple next slides that this sentiment about inflation and cost of living really impacts other metrics, such as optimism and that. The other thing in here too is, it is interesting that lowering taxes for individuals went down by 10%. That'll be interesting to watch. Sometimes, in a poll where you have a lot of questions, we have to kind of take tax questions with a grain of salt, because I think, sometimes you can ask a question and of, do you like puppies? And you know what answer you're going to get. And I think if you ask somebody, do you think your taxes should be lower? I think the answer you're going to get. But it is interesting that when put in with inflation, we had just that much of a significant jump. But this gives you a sense of where people prioritize items from a policy standpoint. As I mentioned, that inflation and cost of living concern has really bled over when we look at the crosstabs and in this one. How do people feel about their future? You can see in 21 versus and we do these polls at the end of the year in December and then broadcast the information in January. You could see a significant drop, but still enough people that feel pretty good about where they live and the opportunities that still exist. And then again, similarly in the crosstabs, the reason I put this one on here is as well. Very similar statistically, you see a big drop in those policy priorities and then moving forward. Excuse me. And as I mentioned, when you're again, this comes from the National Deloitte poll from post-millennials. You know, as I mentioned, generationally, you know, it used to be sufficient for the baby boomer generation, Gen X, that, you know, get them a job and then they'll figure out where they live. And now, as you guys probably on the phone know far better than me, what used to be simple arithmetic has moved to very complicated calculus in trying to land future talent. And, you know, post-millennial are thinking about living, working, and playing, not just the job being sufficient. And the trends nationwide really show that. And as you well know, it used to be jobs and benefits, and now you have to start thinking about, you know, should our company be making investments in art? Should our company be thinking about what's our community doing for trail systems? How many days from home can somebody work? And you can see that in the trends. And if you're not thinking that way, this generation that is now the largest group in the workforce, you're going to miss opportunities. And again, not surprisingly, something that we're seeing as very inferior is on entertainment opportunities. But this just pushes back towards placemaking, really, to me, is how are people thinking about opportunities in their community. You know, the likelihood of landing a U2 concert, you know, in Marshalltown is very low. But you know what you can do is find those local things and the ones I use, especially in the Chamber Alliance, is I'm a music nerd. So I love when I go to Mason City and how they've branded the town with Meredith Willson. I love it when I go to Davenport and there's all the Bix Beiderbecke and jazz stuff. Like what is the unique thing for you when you're trying to think about how you leverage your own identity in those entertainment opportunities? Now, this one is extremely interesting. While it's, I think, somewhat shocking even to us that outdoor recreation scored very highly, when you actually peel into the crosstabs, let me see, I think it's the next editing problem. When you look at the crosstabs, what you find is while a large group of people believe that our outdoor recreation is at least on par with our neighbors, again, going back to this generational, when we dig back in, the folks that are 1 to 4 who think that they're inferior are more likely to be post-millennials who have considered leaving. So to me, again, when I go back to legislators, I say, you know, I will reap. These are things that CAT, the Community Attraction Tourism Grants, these are things that the state has to be thinking about, because people want bike trails, they want water trails, they want to be outside. And, you know, they don't want garbage cans full of trash when they show up at a campsite too. So these are the things that you have to think about in order to attract this generation for future needs. And as I mentioned, what's really concerning is the folks that are considering leaving and looking at career opportunities typically fit, again, the demographic of high-income earners with college degrees in this post-millennial generation. And as I said, that's the most concerning thing is when we poll, what's your reason for leaving? When that, even though it dropped this year, is still such a significant statistic that's something, again, there's nothing a legislator can do to fix this situation. Really, when I give these presentations, I hope it's illustrative to the chambers and your communities to say, okay, what information, how are we not getting the right information to our community members to let them know that there are opportunities within their current employer and there's opportunities within this community, and they don't need to think about going somewhere else. And what's really concerning, as I mentioned, when you really pull this in here, typically the group that fits within this 25% are high income earners plus 100,000 college degree and millennial. That makes up the bulk of that number. So last but not least, as I said, you know, for somebody who's lived away and came back, I think nothing illustrated more about our state than having a beautiful baseball game that had the most viewers in baseball for, I think, 10 years. And then 2 White Sox players deciding to eat corn that is designed for pigs and cows. Nothing illustrates people's view of Iowa more than this. And I think really it illustrates that clearly people came to the state and had an amazing experience and an amazing event, but folks just don't know the state. And I think what we have here in what we have to offer needs to be better marketed and targeted towards those generational. So Laura and Tom, I will stop there and answer any questions that people have.
Thanks, Dustin. That was great. So yes, if you guys have questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand. We can kind of go around the group to get those questions answered. Let me see if I can make this bigger.
Well, while those are coming in, Dustin, one question I did get when I shared this initial poll was, what is the p-value that was used? I had to look this up away from my statistics class, but I think it is a representative of statistical significance. Is it like a 0.1 up to a 0.5? And maybe you don't know that number.
Yeah, we have it. And I can also give anybody who wants all that background stuff. But yeah, I don't know the standard deviation on this thing.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions folks have for Dustin? I had one, Dustin. You talked a lot about with just like the generations and kind of the changing with millennials and Gen Zs coming into the workforce. A lot about life outside of work is really important with them. What are some ways companies can get involved with some of those community initiatives like the placemaking you were talking about?
I think, you know, the interesting things is that I've seen, at least in ICR, is just this regional initiative is extremely important. You have to think about collectively. And one of the things that I've talked about is we have to think about Iowa as a region rather than just Eastern Iowa. I mean, when you take all of our population, it isn't the size of Chicago. It isn't the size of even Minneapolis. So I think we have to think collectively in when we broadcast the people, that is all that, you know, there are great places all around the state that aren't just our own communities that we're trying to market. But really you have to look inwardly and say, what do we have to broadcast? I think in Iowa City, it's very easy to have a very large Regents institution that has a bunch of activities all the time. But there are other unique things about the community that isn't just the school. Similarly, in Cedar Rapids, you've had a number of employers for a lot of years that have dominated it. And I think it's pretty easy to, and I would say as well, like what I have loved, I love what has happened in Cedar Rapids, where they're starting to feel, and just since my time being back in 2012, with the growth of neighborhoods, and obviously flood did a lot of that, but there is a vibiness to it, you know, and I think that vibe obviously attracts other people and attracts interest and energy, but it has to be, you know, focused upon what's authentic to your community, not trying to cut from somebody else's.
Thank you. Looks like we got a couple questions here. Jeff asked, or stated and asked, there is a cycle of employees leaving due to employment opportunities elsewhere and employers not being able to find employees here. Any?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeff, because I think not only have when I typically, you got a good trigger for me here, because when I usually talk about this, we talk about, okay, what are we doing to tell people locally? I think employers also have to look at, is there a wage discrepancy? Because I think we all assume that a kid leaving the University of Iowa that gets an offer in Chicago or Minneapolis, I think we assume that if they could stay in Cedar Rapids, that it would be a $50,000 job. And if they went to Minneapolis, it's $60,000. And we would all say, well, cost of living and taxes would make no sense to go up there. But what I think we really have to look at is that person being offered 50, are they actually being offered 75 or 80 in Chicago or Minneapolis? Because if that's the case, you know, that cost of living, yes, while it's more expensive, they're getting more salary in their minds. And they get to go to Cubs games and they get to go to Vikings games, you know, things that are tough to replicate. And so, and I also, you know, in this generationally, I think we, you know, I had a legislator who is he's a Gen Zer, and he hit me upon when I went to University of Iowa. My roommate was from Naperville. I went to, you know, a Cubs game a summer and said, boy, that was really cool. But I went home and, you know, didn't think about it again, as opposed to this generation is getting bombarded every day about how much better life is in Minneapolis and Chicago on social media. And we all know it's not the case. You know, the levels of depression and mental health are high, but it's very easy to broadcast big things in larger cities. So I think that wage discrepancy is something we have to take a look at as well, and understand that you know, wow, that it's just going to be a challenge to run our businesses. And you're already probably facing intense wage pressure, but that might be a big issue that folks have to look at internally.
This one is kind of a quick one here. Is there data that shows the number of people who live in Iowa but work for organizations outside of the state?
I do not know that, but I have been looking at relocation kind of programs across the country, and that's the kind of trend that really came out of COVID. Was a lot of states tried to do kind of attraction incentives for people that were moving and teleworking. But no, I don't think IEDA or anyone has specific information on that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that, because the talent market is national, global so much nowadays because of the remote style approach that we can take with working. So it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah, and to Julie's question there about other states, it is interesting. Our pollster is actually doing this for other, now the questions aren't identical, but they're doing it for some other statewide chambers. I think Indiana and one other. So they've been really wonderful to work with and have thought of questions for us and process throughout this process. But that's one of the reasons we went with them, is they were already working with other chambers on the same issue. Yeah,
and I know that is a thought that has kind of circulated around here, at least, is like, could we focus on, and I know Tom has been part of those conversations with our talent hub, but market Iowa as a place for those remote workers to come live, and maybe they work elsewhere, but again, getting more people here in some different ways and some different strategies.
Can I just pop in there real quick? Sorry, yeah. I'm in staffing, and when the pandemic was at its height, most of our job orders were at 85% remote. And now that the pandemic is over, quote unquote, and I think employers have taken back the control a little bit, or the reins a little bit, we have seen a complete inverse in that, and our to have a completely remote job is more like 15% for our job orders. So the trend, I mean, Disney called back their employees. So I mean, like, the trend is definitely turned to more of a hybrid situation. There still are a lot of remote jobs out there, but I think for most employers, it has inversed since the pandemic.
And Laura, I can just put my email in the chat so that we give time to Jasmine. So if anybody has questions, and Ryan, you can follow up with me specifically on property tax, and I'll keep the floods from you. So.
Yeah, and I did get a question, Dustin, if we could share your slides with the group.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so I will get those shared out afterwards with everyone on the call.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dustin. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dustin.
What was that, Tom?
Just a thank you.
Oh.
Thanking Dustin.
Perfect. Yes, That was wonderful. And now we'll switch over to our next presenter for the morning. I'm very excited to have her with us. Jasmine Almoyed is joining us this morning, and we'll be talking about the skills report that Kirkwood put out for the year. And Jasmine joined, I'll do a quick intro of her and then let her take over here. Jasmine joined Kirkwood Community College in July of 2021 as the Vice President of Continuing Education and Training Services. The division serves as a leader in regional workforce initiatives and provides all facets of continuing education and life learning programs. The division works closely with private, public, and nonprofit sector partners on creating workforce solutions specific to employment demands, while also connecting individuals with tools and resources to upskill or reskill. Prior to this role, Jasmine was hired as the first economic development liaison for the city of Cedar Rapids, later growing the role into a department within the city manager's office. There she led a team responsible for recruiting, new business and development, business retention, workforce development, strategic planning, and economic development marketing. Jasmine holds an AA from Kirkwood Community College, BA degrees in psychology and political science from University of Iowa, and a master's degree in political science from Iowa State. Jasmine is passionate about creating programming and solutions to assist marginalized populations and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Born to immigrants of the former Yugoslavia, Jasmine understands the importance of education, hard work, and helping those who are underserved. So with that, Jasmine, I'll turn it over to you and let you.
Sounds good. Thank you. I need to get a shorter version of my bio over to people. So good morning, everyone. I am excited to be here to talk to this particular group because I think a lot of you are sort of from that HR and recruiting world. And so this information hopefully will be of particular interest to all of you. I think it's actually really good though to go after Dustin, because what he was talking about, I think does kind of align, you know, the workforce problems that we're facing are super complicated and they're layered. And so there's so many different players in this space that have to focus on a lot of different pieces in order for this to work. And so the presentation that I'll be sharing with you today is going to cover what I would say almost is like the opposite end of the spectrum. So a lot of what Dustin was talking about was more of those like highly educated younger professionals. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of the flip side of that. So for those who work in economic development, one of the struggles that I think we always face is the fact that a lot of companies who are looking to expand or they're looking to bring new business opportunities, it might be a new like line for a factory. The challenges sometimes that they face is that they can't find those frontline production workers either. So, you know, it's a little harder at times to find the local talent to staff those positions. And so with higher end positions, obviously you might have budgets to recruit or you can bring people in. It's the local talent pool sometimes that becomes the most challenging part of that. And so a lot of what we'll cover today in the skills survey is about kind of that side of it. So I'm going to attempt to do a screen share and make sure I'm doing the right one here. Okay. All right, are you seeing the right one? Are you seeing the notes page or are you seeing the actual presentation?
The notes page is up.
All right, I'm gonna switch my display settings. Okay, is that better?
Yep.
Okay, great. Only because there's some figures that I want you to be able to see. So having the full view will be helpful. So what I kind of want to start with today is actually a little bit of a walk through history. So if you're not new to this region, you've probably heard about these skills reports in the past. So it's, to me, important to kind of go back all the way to the beginning. So the very first report was actually done in February of 1999. And so at that time, it was called the Skills 2000 Commission Report, and it was an assessment of major employers' skill and employment needs in East Central Iowa. That was the full title. It was published by a group called the Skills 2000 Research Group, and Kirkwood was just assisting in that work at the time. It actually started out of Des Moines. The report was based on a survey at that time of 33 major employers that were representative of 12.7% of the regional workforce. And they looked at really 5 major growth business sectors at that time. So manufacturing, healthcare, IT, ag and biotech, and then general services. General services could have been everything from like finance to insurance, other types of professional services, probably back in that era, it was a lot of like telecom companies, that sort of thing. They looked at basically 5 major research questions, and it was related to the need of replacement workers at that time by 2005. Anticipated skills profiles, technology direction, how training needs were currently being met, and then required education levels if they had changed, and how Kirkwood could implement programs to help assist with meeting skill gaps. The part that kind of struck me, as funny was the person who chaired that group at the time was then Alliant Energy President Jim Hoffman, who some of you actually might know because he's been around the area in a variety of capacities since then. But he had a quote at the executive summary, and it said, "Frankly, this may be one of the most important and disturbing reports about this region that you will ever see." And the reason why that's funny is because here we are 20 years later, and the findings of that report were that the labor force growth rate in the 90s expanded to nearly twice the rate of population growth. Unemployment declined from 2.68% in 1997 to 2.19% in the first quarter of 1998, and that an alarming percentage of the workforce would be retiring in the next decade. And if skills capacity was not expanded, growth would be diverted to other communities and states. So particularly for those who have worked in or around the workforce development space, it's basically the exact same conversation that we're having here 20 years later. So not a lot of change. I don't know if it's still alarming at this point, but it certainly is indicative of the fact that, as Dustin presented, the state will continue and it will persistently be an issue for us that we are just not a high growth state. And that's really where a lot of this comes from. Since then, the skills report has been released every 4 years. We have modified the survey tool over those years. However, it's essentially looking at a lot of the same sorts of questions. And I'm going to actually just give you a little bit of background on that as well. So other than kind of like a brief hiatus that occurred in the 2022 report, the skills survey really has focused on a lot of the same sorts of information. When I say the hiatus from 2022, there was a skills forecast that was released that year. That was a joint effort with ICR Iowa, and they just included a number of different survey areas. The survey at that point was pretty long, so I think it was difficult to get employers to fill out the information, and so we didn't get a huge response from it. And it really did focus kind of on a lot of questions that focused on some of the things that Dustin just presented on. So it was a lot more about diversity, equity, and inclusion types of questions were in there. There was a lot of information about communities, about questions maybe around things like childcare. So just kind of the whole spectrum of workforce issues. And while that's a good thing to have in a discussion, for the purposes of this report, I think we needed to narrow the scope and kind of get back to basics. So our team, in conjunction with the Institutional Research Division of Kirkwood, built a survey instrument with the following goals in mind. And those are what you see in front of you on the screen. So understanding education and credential requirements, the workforce talent needs by industry sector, assisting economic and workforce development partners and employers to respond to the most pressing talent development issues, and then guiding those regional career pathway development, workforce policy, education, and training strategies. So that was the goal behind the questions that we asked. I know that for some of you, this is probably old hat information, but I thought it would be good, just in case there are folks in the room who are maybe kind of newer to this topic, to go through some terms basically. So if you're not familiar, the Iowa Workforce Development Division at the state releases these labor shed area reports on a pretty consistent basis. The last one that was released that I'm pulling this data from was from 2021. So it probably would be useful to kind of go through some of these definitions. according to this report, if you kind of, hopefully on a screen like this, you'll be able to see it. It's a little harder when we do these presentations live, but it's defined as an area or region from which an employment center draws its commuting workers. So somebody had asked the question, I think, about people traveling out of state. They do at IWD at least look at sort of where are your employment centers and where are you drawing your labor shed from. So for our area, it's that 920,924 people. And that is defined also as working aged individuals from 18 to 64. Of that number, the total labor force, which is all of the members of that labor shed area's population who are able to work collectively, was 729,401. If you look at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics data, currently for our unemployment rate as of December of 22, it's slightly up from November, but it's down a percentage point from this time last year. We are trending with the state and just slightly lower than the current national average. And if you look at kind of the definition of what a healthy unemployment rate is based on most economist standards, it's somewhere between 3 and 5%. So by all accounts, it's good to have a low unemployment rate. It's good for people to have a low unemployment rate. That means that they're working. It means that they have some form of income. That said, there's a lot of nuance behind it. So just looking at the numbers doesn't always tell you the full picture. When you talk about this number with employers, for example, that's concerning, because if you're feeling like there's a persistent issue with trying to hire and you have a low unemployment rate, it means that people aren't as readily available. Recruiting becomes a lot more difficult. Sometimes you have people maybe in the labor force, or you're hiring folks that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be participating. They might have other types of issues. They might have a spotty work history. So there's a lot of sort of nuance that goes into unemployment rates and whether or not it's good to have a low unemployment rate. I think most employers would agree they'd like to see that number a little bit higher. I talk about that because IWD actually paints a slightly more optimistic picture for employers. So when they talk about the unemployment rate, they're not using that really strict BLS definition. They are saying that about 9.9% of the labor force is unemployed. 3.3% of who they talk to are identified as homemakers. Another 4.4% are retirees. And so I know that some of the current workforce initiatives that have been put out there, I know like the EA, I think just launched one specifically about the retiree workforce. Like, how do you get people who are maybe over this working age population who have retired back into the workforce, into positions? So these are the types of things that they're looking at. So of the total available workforce, how can we tap into those individuals more? I think that if we look at these two unemployment numbers, it does appear to be substantial enough that there should be some creative programming done with workforce development partners to try to tap into those workers. I mean, it does, again, give you a broader pool of candidates to potentially be hiring from, but that's going to take some efforts, I think, in terms of actively trying to re-engage those workers back into the workforce for any number of reasons why they may have left. So getting back to the report, we conducted this study from June through August of 2022. We distributed to businesses within Kirkwood's 7-county region. So as we're talking about this, just remember that we're talking about Kirkwood's 7 counties, which, if you don't know what that is, it's Lynn, Johnson, Benton, Cedar, Iowa, Jones, and Washington. So those are the 7 counties that we're talking about. We had identified 383 employers that we invited to participate. And then we also created an anonymous link that we provided to community partners. So we asked economic development groups, we asked some of our media partners to also distribute to their listservs. And then on the back end, to make sure that we were not receiving multiple responses from the same companies and making the data less statistically significant, we built in mechanisms on the back end. So that way we were only receiving one set of responses per company. Of that survey link, we received 137 responses. And we were not surprised to see that the majority of the survey responses had identified 3 workforce factors that they said impeded their ability to grow or expand. So again, lack of qualified candidates, a small labor pool, and then recruitment and retention were the top issues. When we looked at where the responses were coming from, we were pretty happy to see that the numbers were pretty proportionate to the types of populations that were represented across the region. So the vast majority came from the Lyndon Johnson areas, which, you know, seems to be appropriate given that's where the vast majority of the companies are in our region. But we did have all of the rural counties had representation. Back to kind of Dustin's presentation that he just did, this doesn't certainly correct for the fact that there could be other things impacting it, whether it's a housing shortage or healthcare shortage or anything else that could be impacting their ability to recruit. I think that it does account for some of those things and make sure that we're at least getting survey responses that are reflective of the workforce challenges that we're facing in total. And it's not just, you know, well, Cedar Rapids is the largest city, largest employer, and that doesn't necessarily apply to us in Cedar County. We have representation there from all of the areas. We also had a really good distribution between the size of companies. So 29.93% came from 49 employees or less. The bulk came in that medium range. So we defined that as 50 to 249. And then we had another 28% that were 250 employees or more. So again, depending on your company size, there's a lot of factors too that could be contributing to workforce challenges. So we were glad to see that. We felt like it had a pretty good distribution to be representative of company size. And then we had a pretty good spread from the industry that responded. So we had, again, pretty reflective numbers of what you would see as far as the types of employers in the region. Manufacturing, construction, healthcare, professional, scientific, and technical kind of being at the top, educational services, finance, and insurance, and then all the way on down to management of companies and enterprises. So this is a self-reported survey. So companies did, on the ones we invited, they were pre-sorted based off of NAICS codes that we had identified for those companies. But for companies who took the survey anonymously, they just would have selected the best representative category for where they would have put themselves in. So going to kind of that full list of the top needs and skills for growth, we see, again, lack of qualified candidates, small labor pool. We just went over those. We also saw things like wages and benefits, changing population and demographics, education levels, basically the same types of things if you're engaging in these conversations that you're probably talking about yourselves. It's not like any of this is probably earth-shattering information, but always good to have that anecdotal information confirmed. And then it starts to get interesting when we start to drill down into the more specific types of questions. So this question about what skills are you missing from the pool of applicants that you're seeing, the number one answer, work ethic, attendance, and dependability. This, if you look at the trend from the previous reports, is something that's always been there. Now, what I will say is it seems to be heightened. So there is raw data on the back end of this that includes more comments. And a lot of what we were seeing are things like, yeah, it would just be great if they could show up at all to work, or they could come in on time, or a definitive increase in the types of responses around just kind of professionalism, as we would probably look at it, just basic professionalism in the workplace, like communicating appropriately to your supervisor. Are you just texting them instead of, sending an email? These are the types of responses that we were getting into when we look at like the anecdotes, and then we sorted them sort of as best as possible into these groups. Lack of overall experience, again, lack of applicants. And then we started to see in some areas very specific types of skill sets. So you'll see things like construction and carpentry, industrial technology, welding. Some were substantial enough to where we actually created categories for them, because it does indicate that there's a trend with specific types of workers that we seem to be having additional struggles placing. The adaptable to change, willingness to learn one was also interesting, because I think that, again, this can kind of be construed based on the comments that were received with, is this kind of a workplace culture change that we're talking about here? Or is this really something where we're seeing that maybe this newer pool of applicants, and I won't necessarily say it's age related because that wasn't spelled out, but because of the fact that we're pulling from a well of potential workers that, as I kind of alluded to earlier, a lot of companies weren't as accustomed to having to select from in the past. They're starting to see trends, I think, with workers that have always been there, but with what I would consider sort of these artificially inflated wages that we're experiencing because of COVID. Especially when you talk to like our premier employers, the ones where, you know, a company like General Mills or Collins Aerospace or any of these companies where they would post a position and maybe they would receive 300 applicants to choose from. As that spigot started to dry up, it became a situation where, you know, the person who works at Casey's is also making 18 or 19 or $20 an hour. And all of these employers who used to be like, wow, we pay so much higher, are now getting applicants that are the same mentality of that. Like, yeah, I got really drunk last night, so I'm just not coming into work tomorrow. It's an interesting dynamic in terms of just, is part of this the workforce itself changing, or is part of this because of those wages increasing? You're just seeing a different type of worker in environments where maybe traditionally they didn't used to actually appear as part of the labor pool. Recruitment and retention. We wanted to see, what are companies doing at this point? Like, what kind of steps are they sort of being required to take out of necessity, and how that's impacted potentially who they were hiring as well. So if you hired a less qualified candidate, how did you lower qualifications or expectations? Overwhelmingly, that we heard less experience required. So if they used to have, you know, you had to have a degree plus 5 years of professional experience, that was something that maybe they've made adjustments to, or, you know, it had to be direct or relevant experience. We saw almost half say that, that they've made this change. Narrowing the scope of the position, what that meant was maybe a position used to have a lot more criteria in terms of what they were responsible for in an organization. And some of those tasks or some of those responsibilities had been stripped away, maybe placed into 2 different types of positions. So kind of getting less productivity maybe out of a singular person. And then we saw less education required, overlooking criminal or incarceration. I found that to be interesting because when we talk about how are we as workforce development partners trying to address strategies, and I know I'm guilty of this, sometimes I feel like we end up doing these things sort of in isolation of the information. So to me, it was telling that, you know, I know that I had spent a fair amount of time on fair chance hiring and, you know, having these strategies sort of built around, hey, you know, here's this pool of talent that you might consider if we can figure out a way to overlook some of these criminal backgrounds. Well, only 7.76% of respondents said that that was something that they were doing, versus half saying, yeah, we're just going to lower our expectations of any given candidate. And so to me, you know, are we placing our strategies in a place, you know, we have limited resources, we have limited time as individuals. Are we actually doing the things that employers are really wanting, or are we focusing too much of our efforts on things we would hope that they would do? So, so those comments and some of this data to me was just telling in terms of how we want to shape our strategies as a collective team going forward as well. Not to say that we shouldn't be doing these things, but we can't force upon employers what they're unwilling to do. And so it seems like fewer employers than I would have thought are at a place where these are the types of things that they're interested or willing to do. What percentage of your organization's position require the following education requirements? This to me was interesting. So when you put together the high school diploma or equivalent and no education requirements, you get, you know, 60%. 60% of the jobs don't require anything beyond high school. And that to me was pretty interesting as well. The 4-year college degree category is only 16%. When you start to look at 2-year college and certifications, that's an even smaller, or that's a, you know, 15% between the two basically. And then, or 17%. And then the graduate degree is also very low. So again, this is information just from those who responded to the survey. So there could just, be a lot of outliers out there that could change these numbers, but we feel fairly confident that this is pretty representative of the employers in our region. So the fact that so few are requiring anything behind high school, particularly for those of us in higher ed, should be concerning. We wanted to kind of look into that a little bit more. So we started to drill down a little bit into those questions. And when we said, okay, so if your educational requirements for skilled positions, or have they changed over the past 5 years, we found 22%, almost 23% said yes. But then when we asked how that changed, of the nearly 23% that said yes, they had, the majority had lowered their expectations. So it's not that they're requiring more education. They're saying less or no degree or certification required. They added more experience in lieu of educational requirements. We saw a lot of people saying we've added in-house training to supplement training requirements. So I always take a personal point of privilege when I get to this slide, because one of the things that I can't, this is just me making a correlation, and maybe it is or it's not relevant, but back in 2013, I wrote a thesis about the middle skills gap, and I was one of the biggest proponents of take out all of the sort of superfluous pieces of a degree, and let's really just focus on technical skills and sort of get people in and out and get them trained. As we start to see more and more people saying my gosh, these people are coming into us and they can't communicate with each other, and they can't work in an environment with other people very well. I can't help but think, is that a part of it? So as we're starting to say, let's strip out sort of these humanities and liberal arts components to education in general to get people back into the workforce faster, particularly in a place like Iowa. And, and I'm not saying this in any bad way. It's a very homogenous state. And, as this group probably has some sensitivity to, since you focus on DE&I work in particular, there are absolutely people who come to this institution and who probably come to the University of Iowa who may have never left the county that they're from, or don't have a lot of experience with people from other cultures, different races. And as we're seeing the shift in our demographic, where we're seeing a lot of people coming in, immigrant workforce, and that becomes, part of the solution. If somebody is from an area where they don't have a lot of exposure to other cultures, a lot of times where they would get that was in college. They would come to a class, they would be taught critical thinking and problem solving in humanities courses. They would be, forced into certain gen ed requirements. Maybe they take a women's studies class that, everybody likes to poke fun at. But I think that through that learning, it did bring a lot of culture to people who otherwise maybe just don't have a broad worldview. So I say that kind of as it's a cautionary tale to some extent. And remember, I'm in the continuing education division of the college. We focus on certifications. I'm not part of the academic side of the institution. But, for my colleagues on that side, I will say that I do think that this is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. As we start to strip away some of these elements that do help people kind of expand their horizons, learn communication skills beyond just the technical elements of writing. I do think that this is potentially a troubling trend that we are imposing on ourselves because of the fact that we're just wanting so quickly to get people technical skills. So I'm done. I'm off my soapbox, but that's, if somebody wants to do a research paper, I will help you get the information. I don't want to write one, but I would help with the information to it. So looking at the workforce gaps that will be predicted in the next 3 years, a lot of it, again, industrial technologies, computer skills is rising, obviously, to the top in different types of ways. So it's not like this is new, but certainly with emerging technologies, AR, VR, a lot of things around automation, that has become, again, more of a pressing concern. Labor shortages, reliable employees, there we are again, communications, customer service, and soft skills. And then healthcare nursing, that's a cyclical one as well. So we all know about the nursing shortage and healthcare worker shortage in general. That is obviously been exacerbated, I think, from the pandemic, but also if you look at historical trends, that's been something that's been predicted for quite some time as well. So the CDL transportation one, because of in light of our recent announcement, we had 6 companies respond to that. So Kirkwood is actually going to be announcing a partnership that we're doing next week. We've had some changes at the state level in terms of what they would like to see for CDLA. Until I came here, I didn't know there was a big difference, but CDLA is more what you think of with like semi trucks and that sort of thing. And then CDLB is the types of workers in our region that I think are going to be more in demand. So school bus drivers, truck drivers that drive like box trucks like FedEx or UPS or Amazon, dump truck drivers, cement mix companies, things like that in construction. So we are actually partnering because the cost to provide these programs is so astronomical, and we're seeing fewer people coming to us for CDLAs, but it's so expensive to run the behind the wheel portion that in order for these programs to sustain, we're partnering to offer that behind the wheel portion somewhere else. And then we're going to try to invest really heavily in the CDLB portion. So we made a slight change to our program. I felt like I should probably address that, so you don't think that we're not considering how we're handling that going forward. But there's a lot of nuance, I think, even within these areas of where a lot of these challenges exist. And we're going to have to continue to do additional work around what specifically in industrial tech or construction. Moving into the recommendations portion, I'm sorry if I'm going way over on time. This kind of goes again along with what Dustin was talking about. So we wanted to focus on recommendations that weren't simply Kirkwood types of things. So the first that we talk about is just doing culture assessments and addressing areas of deficiency. One of the things that I think people need to make sure that they're working to understand is that people are burned out. They're working really hard. There's been shortages. It's stressful. And just post-pandemic, it seems like people are kind of struggling to find their way. So when you have sort of like bad apples on your team, like it's important to work to get those folks out as well. I think that, a lot of what we're seeing too is just cultures where people feel like they're coming into work and it's not great. And so they're leaving over something that really could be addressed maybe by just management or leadership. The other thing is the concept of survey work. If you're going to ask employees questions, just make sure that you have a plan to address them later. There's a lot of, I think, interest in people going out and surveying their employees, and then they get this response and crickets. So it's kind of better. So an HR professional once told me, it's better to just not even ask. If you ask people, you get them riled up, they give you feedback, they feel like something's going to happen, and then you can't address it. Maybe you don't have the resources to, or you just know you don't have the bandwidth. Just don't even do the survey. Like that's, just a note for the day. Just don't do the survey, or do the survey once you feel like, yep, once we have this information, we can tackle it. And then also making sure that you're investing in the people that you have. So when we looked at, all of these people that we're talking about, the communication skills and coming to work, like these are productivity types of things. This is work ethic. You can't train work ethic to someone. I mean, maybe you can, I don't know, but what you can train are like hard skills. So if you have someone that's super dependable and they're really eager to do more work, it's better to invest in them and promote them within the organization. You'll probably keep them longer. At an educational institution, we see this every day. People who come to us with literally nothing, and then they leave on the other end and they're able to like intubate a patient, or they're able to, weld a tanker truck. People can learn skills, but you really need to focus on who are your good people, who are your reliable people, find those folks, and then, make sure that you're holding on to them and providing them upward mobility in your organization. Making sure that employers are taking a more active role in directing training, education, and apprenticeship programs. This is, again, this is maybe a little self-serving for Kirkwood, but also I think for other workforce providers. So we are in the process right now, actually, of reestablishing our sector boards. And we did that because I feel like we started to get to a point where we weren't getting enough employers around the table. And I'm not going to go into too much of that, but I always give an example here where we were barreling down the path at Kirkwood of starting a cybersecurity program. We did a 90-minute session with some of our largest companies. And, people love Kirkwood and they come and they'll always provide us feedback. The problem is that sometimes I don't know that we are really asking questions in the right way where we're not driving the conversation. So if we ask a bunch of cybersecurity experts, like what are the traits that we need? And they're like, oh yeah, so, this is what SOC is. This is, the specifics around our program, they will give us that information all day long. 10 minutes before the meeting concluded, I just said, hey, so by the way, how many of you are hiring people with these skills? And they're like, oh, none of us are. We hire a third party for this. We are, maybe we have one person, but we have a global talent pool to select from because, there's lots of people out there. So this is an example where we kind of dodged a bullet where we could have created a program where the students would have had no employment on the other end of it. And why? Because we're not, as educators, they're not always as in tune with what the needs are in the community. So what we found out is they're like, oh yeah, but we all could use data governance and compliance people. Like we don't need hackers. What we need is somebody who's essentially a CPA with some IT knowledge that can come in and assess where our security threats are and get our data in a more secure fashion. Like we need to look at our policies, we need to look at access. So, thank God for that discussion because it shaped the way that we decided to move ahead with this program before we had invested all of this time and resources. So if, your workforce partners are asking you to attend meetings, if educational partners are, like, it is so important for you to come and to be honest with us about what the needs are, because we're here to help. And we want, obviously, our students to have opportunities on the back end, whether that's, our non-credit lifelong learners or whether that's our typical credit students. We want to create job opportunities for them and we want to meet your needs. But if we're the ones kind of trying to determine what those needs are, sometimes I think we can all get sideways. And then the last one I'll talk about is just looking at these non-traditional tactics. So Dustin really covered all of it in the beginning. We're looking at population that's pretty stagnant. Where we are seeing growth are things like immigrant populations. How are we trying to re-engage workers who maybe have retired or who are stay-at-home moms currently? So working on those types of programs for your own company. We do a lot with earn and learn. So working with companies who are willing to bring individuals in who maybe don't have all of the skills that they need. We do this a lot, actually, mainly with our ELL folks that are maybe just not there. They are somewhat literate in English, but maybe not quite there, where they can come, they can get a job, they can collect a paycheck. But the employer is allowing them to go 1 or 2 hours a day to a contextualized English class to get them the skills that they need to kind of get to that next level. So these are the types of things where, again, your workforce partners can help you create programs that maybe will help you tap into a workforce population that you haven't worked with in the past, but because of the resources that we can bring to the table, hopefully it can be a positive experience both for that particular population and for the employer. So if you want to read more about this report, I think the link was sent out by Laura. There's additional resources in there as well that contain links. Sometimes it's just hard for us to get the information out about, whether it's financial resources, programs that are happening to employers. We want to make sure that everyone is aware of the fact that there's a lot going on and that there are resources to help. So that's just a few of them. There's more in the report. And if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm sorry if I went way over on my time.
No, you're perfect. Thank you, Jasmine. Appreciate going over that and taking time today with us. So yeah, if we have questions from the group, we can put them in the chat or you guys can kind of jump on too and ask them directly. I did have a question to kind of start things off, because Kirkwood, you guys are really good, I think, about adapting to what our community needs and creating programming and strategies. When you hear about those needs, based on this survey and the results, are there new strategies or programs that you guys are, I know you mentioned the CDL is changing. Are there other things that you guys are changing due to that report?
Yeah, there's, so we're kind of changing on the non-credit side. So there's a lot going on right now at the college in general with guided pathways work, where we just have a pretty strong understanding of the fact that the student body is changing that we're serving. You know, there's this thing called the education cliff in 2025 that we already knew was happening. There just wasn't a bunch of kids being born in the early 2000s. And so the graduating high school class like really nosedives right around that year, but we're already seeing low enrollment. All educators are seeing lower enrollment. So what that means is we have to change the way that we offer programming. We have to really focus more on student support if we want students to actually continue and be able to attain their degrees. So some of the things that we're working on, we just launched, for example, you know, there's a shortage for EMT and paramedics. And so we just launched a hybrid offering of our EMT class where 10 of the students are traditional credit students, and we had 20 non-credit students join that class, because what we've done is we've taken sort of the theory portion, the traditional classroom portion, and instead of coming twice a week for 4 hours, if you're super ambitious, you can do it all as quickly as humanly possible online at your own pace. There is, you know, all kinds of checks built in on the front end. And then you still have to pass like a national exam by the certifying body. So it's not like you can just go, okay, well, I've clicked through the slides and, you know, and taken the exams and whatever. You know, this allows people maybe who have a full-time job, but want to become an EMT, the ability to do so. And it doesn't create as much of a problem getting to campus or finding childcare. With that program, they only have to come to Kirkwood's campus for their kind of practical piece of it twice on Saturdays for 8 hours, or we have like a Wednesday evening option. And then they actually do the last part, their clinical part is embedded with a paramedic service. So they can actually be paid while they're working. We're actually working on creating the same thing now with paramedic. There's a grant out there for apprenticeships. So we're looking a lot more at how are we making learning more accessible to students without, you know, without messing too much with the fact that we want them to still learn. You know, it's not like we're doing online classes to try to make it easier to pencil whip your way through. But for working professionals and technical programming, we can't expect that they're going to come here, you know, especially because most of them have jobs. And even if you do evening classes or weekend classes, that's a real long day to expect someone to come. Also, transportation becomes an issue, childcare. So we're looking at a lot of our programs in terms of breaking them down into kind of shorter segments. We're also offering new stuff. Like we just got an AR/VR lab. Right now, I think we're just trying to get people more familiar with what that is. But at some point it is talking to employers about, you know, maybe it's good to have a lineman see if they can even handle it in virtual reality before you have them climbing up a pole. It might not be the right job for them. There is, you know, a lot of occupations now, certifications that we're going to start offering, and professional development units to keep like licensure requirements. So we're changing a lot of what we're offering, by adding things, and then also changing the format of courses to try to make it easier for people to actually attain credentials and degrees and have something to show for it if they only have 2 weeks to give us at a time versus 2 years.
Thank you. What other questions do we have? I have another one. Just, you mentioned sector boards coming back. Are there ways individuals from this group, if they want to get involved with those conversations, I guess how can one get involved with that?
Yeah, so we are kind of slowly bringing them back on. We have started we're starting with manufacturing, and we're appointing sector boards now. So we're actually asking people to, like, companies would basically appoint someone and they would serve a 2 to 3 year term. This gives us more ability to ensure that we have consistent company representation, that it maintains the employer focus. And then we're also going to be including all of our workforce partners in those conversations. So if there's, you know, representatives from the economic development groups, the cities, the, you know, IWD, the RWIB board, we want them to be there as well. So they're hearing consistent stories, and the sector boards themselves are going to be kind of more like a governance and policy group. We hired a facilitator. So again, I don't want that bias of Kirkwood leading it and having it be like, okay, everyone's quiet and we're not getting the best information. So they'll only meet like for 90 minutes every quarter. If people are interested, they can certainly reach out to us. And if their company hasn't been represented, we can certainly look at the sector. We're trying to keep them under 20. So that way they can have like really good conversation, but we haven't even started reaching out for some of the other areas yet because we want to do it right. But what will come out of those kind of larger policy discussions, or what we're hoping, is subcommittees that will emerge as well. So if somebody says childcare, got it, Jamie and that group that's working in Iowa City, they might want to run off with that childcare thing. Those companies can say, I'll get the right people for my company to participate in this. And then other employers can also join. If there is a conversation that's legislative, then Barb Solberg can take that and run with it. If it's something policy related, maybe IWD wants to get into that. And then if it's education and training, that's where we fit in. So if people are interested in participating, I would say reach out to us. And then if we haven't gotten those companies on distribution lists, we'll make sure to do that as well, or we can talk more about it in whatever way they might be interested in participating.
Thank you. If anyone has one more question, probably can squeeze that in here. If not, I'll let Jasmine get on with her morning.
Hopefully I didn't put him to sleep for you for the next part of your presentation.
You're good. We're wrapping up here shortly. So thank you again for spending your morning with us and sharing that report. Really appreciate it.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jasmine.
So I just want to thank everyone again for participating. I did want to wrap up just sharing about the Talent Hub to make sure everyone is aware of that resource. Just because of the topics we had today, I feel like this is a good resource to share out with the group and make sure it's something you maybe are looking into or utilizing as you are doing your recruitment. But Talent Hub is a part of this organization. It's the talent attraction effort for ICR Iowa. And I think it's been, Tom, was like 4 years that we've been, 3 or 4 years we've been running this now, and it's our talent attraction. So we are marketing the area to folks outside of our community, telling them how great it is, that there's a lot of opportunities in terms of jobs here. And we do it through a target marketing approach. And so they are receiving these through LinkedIn and Facebook. And when they see those messages pop up, they are, if they're intrigued enough, or they are interested enough to want to learn more about the program, they fill out a simple form. Shannon Hansen's our Talent Hub connector, and she meets with them and then talks a little bit more about our community, gets to know who they are and what they're looking for, and then tries to connect them with employers in our area. But employers have an opportunity to participate in this process as well. And I will share the Talent Hub link out with everyone along with the slides and the Kirkwood report after this meeting. But employers can go into our Talent Hub database and see candidates in there that are looking to move to this area, looking for a job opportunity here. And we actually have candidates in there right now that are just that, they're looking for that opportunity. So we'd love for you guys to take advantage of this program and help us get more of those candidates placed here and get them moved to our community. We do have some folks, I think, that maybe are like Des Moines area or like Quad Cities, they're looking to come to the ICR area. So it's not completely just outside of Iowa that are coming here, but we'd love to get more employers involved with that program. Tom, I don't know if you have anything to add about the Talent Hub effort.
Yeah, just to add that there's a, excuse me, a monthly employer call that we host as well. Shannon leads that, where it's an opportunity to dive deeper on specific candidates that she has spoken with in the recent weeks. And it's also an opportunity for you as an employer to share some of the high need or particularly challenging roles that you're trying to get into the door. So we want to continue to host this and hold this space and continue these conversations and grow this pool. There have been hundreds of thousands of individuals that have been at least made aware of opportunities in ICR over the life of this program. It was a pre-COVID initiative that continues to evolve, and we'd love to just grow our employer base and continue to make these connections. But to Laura's point, we push these candidates out pretty routinely through a variety of different modes throughout the region, and let us know. We're always looking for feedback on how to improve it and make it easier for the employer community to get connected. So please share that if you have ideas.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's a good point. That there's the employer call monthly that we have, and then Shannon does send out emails that we can get individuals on that list if you're interested to receive those updates about who she's talked to recently and a little bit about each of those candidates. But yeah, it's a great resource for companies as they are looking for adding to their workforce. So that's all we have for today. I hope you guys learned something new, got some kind of new piece of nugget that you can take with you as you're looking at your recruitment and retention process. And I'll have a follow-up email with some of the resources and then the future dates as well. Would love to see everyone at those meetings. They will be, it's quarterly, and the next 3 will be the second Friday of the month instead of the last, just to avoid some holidays, Memorial Day, Thanksgiving in there. So looking forward to continuing these conversations throughout this year. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.